Good day, everyone. This is Zanda Hilger, and I'm talking to you from North Central Texas. I do these on behalf of the Area Agency on Aging of North Central Texas. I'm a subcontractor to them, or actually, it's called subrecipient now. I'm going to talk about mindfulness and self care. And you may have heard a lot of those words thrown around places because they're becoming more popular, but we're going to examine a few terms and kind of sort out a few things. My background, I have a master's degree in counseling. I'm a licensed counselor. I had a private practice. I was the training director for MHMR for about 7 years and with them for 11 years. And my true passion now is I coordinate a virtual caregiver education program through a website that will be on the slide, but it's familycaregiversonline.net. And I work with just an incredible webmaster, web manager, who has become knew very little about caregiving until we started working together and has just done a tremendous job. I was the primary caregiver for my mother, and it was many years because she had many health problems, chronic health problems. She has been gone for several years now. My husband is still mobile and walking, but he has significant low back problems. He has L5 involvement, which is that lower one that very often is a source of problems, and hip and sciatica. So that limits him a great deal to activities, but he tries harder than he probably should. So, all that to say is, I have walked the path of a caregiver, and it has brought me some perhaps experience that can be beneficial to you, but also all of you have experience that I hope that you will share with us a little bit later on. If you would, let's go through the materials. I've got a PowerPoint presentation, and there's some links to other information. But let me go through that, jot down any questions you have, and I'll stay on here as long as there are people that want to keep talking. So before we go any further, I would like for you to kind of do a self check. Kind of pick a place on the wall and mentally go through your body and try to figure out where you are feeling tightness and tension, top to bottom. What are you finding? And also check in with uh, your what's going on in your head as far as your thoughts and your concerns, your quote unquote worries and fretting. Check in with yourself, and if you had to rate from 1 to 5, with 1 being completely relaxed and 5 being completely unrelaxed and very stressed, in both of those areas, if you had to come up with a score for your physical self and for your mental and emotional self, what would your number be today? And let's see if we can't work with that a little bit. I'm now going to switch over to the PowerPoint slide, and I'm going to share screen with all of you. And please let me know that you are seeing that. Is everybody seeing that? Okay. We had this last month, a little bit of problem with what people were seeing.
If you click on slideshow,
Uh-huh. But now I've got a little ribbon across there. Hopefully this will do it. Here we go. All right. Uh, Everybody seeing the slides? Minerva, are you seeing the slides?
Yep, I see it. No
Great.
issues.
Excellent. All right, let's start with caregiving, self care, and mindfulness, guys, especially during unusually stressful times. I first pulled this information together and named it that right after the lockdown. And then over the last couple of years, I've added to it or kind of made some changes. But please make note of the very first slide and notice that it is these photos show a balanced life. And I know many of you have been struggling with having a balanced life, but look at the healthy foods and the woman walking in the middle and the one on the right who appears to be in contemplation, or she's just kind of hanging out and maybe enjoying that day. She may also be doing some kind of spiritual or religious practice. And the slide on the lower right hand is the social aspect that many people know, that many of you caregivers know. Sometimes that is sacrificed for you as a caregiver, or the people that you are helping, that you're caring for, their social interaction is limited too. And then the lower left hand just as a way to show the importance of hobbies or personal expression. And some people find they're able to do that from home. Some people go to the city and take a class. My sister in law and my niece and I have signed up yesterday for a watercolor class at this through the city. And it will be watercolors of dogs. So that should be interesting. Okay, before we go too much further, let's define a few terms, which includes, here we go. Today, we're going to talk about self care, but how do you do it? You may have been told, well, you need to take better care of yourself. Let's talk about specific ways you can do that. We're going to talk about mindfulness, what it is, what it isn't. We'll talk about ways to relax, some specific ways, and I'll even guide you through some of that. Some stress management tips, some specific 1 through, I think they're close to 20 now, and then links and resources of how can you get assistance if you're not already getting help. So, what is self-care? Let's just quickly define that term. Well, according to Oxford Dictionary, it's the practice of taking action to preserve or improve one's own health. I loved that term, is the practice of taking action to improve one's own health. It's also the practice of taking an active role in protecting one's own well-being and happiness, in particular during times of stress. That's what self care is. It's learning ways to manage the stress that you experience in your life, but most particularly in your role as a caregiver. Self care doesn't mean you don't care less for the person that you take care of or the people you're taking care of. A couple of the quote on the left, you can't pour from an empty cup. You have to take care of yourself first. And some of you on the right may have seen that demonstrated before as a representative of caregiving. But anyone that's ever been on an airplane has experienced the instructions from the flight attendants. If the cabin loses pressure, the face mask will drop back down. You put it on yourself first and tighten the band. Well, what is our natural inclination, our is that we have a tendency that we want to put it on the child next to us or the person we're taking care of. And that is the natural way to do it. But think about it. If you have gotten the mask on others and you're gasping for air, how much can you help them? So the idea is, what are you doing now that helps you keep the oxygen flowing? And are there other things you can do? Look at that list of names. I was fascinated when I saw these names. Well known, they're athletes, scientists, comedians, actors and actresses, a wide variety of people. And there is one thing they have in common: every one of them practices meditation or mindfulness activities. Now, this is a good time for us to talk about the difference between those two, because even in the medical community, they're being used interchangeably. My insurance, or our insurance, is through United Healthcare. And it's not been very long ago that I got something in the mail. I have diabetes, well controlled, but I have diabetes. And I have something that came to me in the mail. And in the materials, it talked about the importance of self care. We used to use the term stress management more, but using self care, and um, that we do it using meditation. So let's kind of keep with some of these words here, just so we can keep it sorted out. I saw this graphic and I just thought it was clever. So I included it because sometimes it does feel that way, that we have our minds are full, often of very confusing and conflicting information and things going on around us. But mindfulness is the one on the right, the more calm, less complicated. All right, so mindfulness. I'm going to go through this quickly. This is actually from the Oxford Dictionary that's online and mindful.com. Mindfulness is the ability to be fully present, aware of where we are and what we're doing, but not overly reactive or overwhelmed by what's going on. It is maintaining a moment by moment awareness of our thoughts, feelings, bodily sensations, and the surrounding environment. Thoughts tune into what you are sensing in the present moment rather than thinking, if only, about the past, or what if, imagining the future. Now, that bullet is mine. And those two terms I define at that if only and what if, I define as worry or fret. You may define it something else, but it is going to a place, if only and what if, um, that we're not there yet, or we can't go back to where we were. And we're going to revisit that in a moment. It also, mindfulness is a mental state achieved by focusing one's awareness on the present moment while calmly acknowledging and accepting one's thoughts, feelings, and sensations. Meditation is more formal. Meditation is usually a seated practice. Um, it is a practice where you focus inward to find and develop calmness, to concentrate, and to have some emotional balance as a goal. Usually begins with deep breathing, bringing awareness to your breath, inhales and exhales, consciously guiding the mind toward an anchor or a single point of focus. You've heard the term mantra before, and that is frequently what meditation, one is taught to find a mantra or find something that is a point of focus. A mantra is actually something that sometimes people say out loud, but they also could pick a candle or an altar where they are. Meditation is focused on opening your heart, expanding your awareness, your mind, experiencing inner peace, and the list goes on. There are many types of it. Here's some example: breath awareness, visualization, guided meditation. And I got a lot of this information from the Chopra Center. That's Dr. Chopra. Now, just looking at that list, it's pretty structured. It's also it takes a lot of practice. And many people don't have that kind of time. I mean, just looking at that list, it looks like it might take some effort and some time and of setting aside, but it is very powerful. And I hope that you have a chance to practice meditation using these bullet points. Anywhere online, you can find step by step, YouTube step by step. The idea of mindfulness, however, is much more here and now in the moment. It is designed to have the same goal of peace and calm and tranquility, but meditation is usually practiced for a specific amount of time and it's set aside. But mindfulness is being aware, it's noticing and paying attention to what's going on right now, thoughts, feelings, behavior, and everything else. Mindfulness can be practiced at any time, at any location, wherever you are, whoever you're with, and whatever you're doing, by being fully engaged in the here and now. Easily said and done, and we're going to practice that. Mindfulness can be applied to any situation, any time of the day or night. I remember vividly a client that I had when I was in private practice, and he said his days were so filled with work, and then he would get home, and he said, "I'm just not going to have time for this." And I said, "Okay, let's talk about when you leave work. What do you do? You're in the car, or in his case, the truck. You're going home. What are the thoughts that are going through your head?" And he said, "Well, I'm thinking about work. I'm thinking about when I get home and things that I need to do." And I said, "Part of what the reason why you're here today is that you have some anxieties about your life and you want to do things different. So let's start with something very simple. You're driving along and you want to be safe for yourself and those around you. Is there anything that you can think that you could focus on that would get you, quote, out of your head, but would also give you an opportunity to practice what we've been talking about?" So he decided that he was going to pay more attention to the car in front of him, good thing to do, and in particular, license plates. Many of us have been on a trip and we've maybe played the license plate game, who can find the most states. But what that did for him, as well as other practices he was using, is it focused him. He did not ignore the other traffic or the people on either side of him. He didn't ignore the speed, but he was paying attention or focusing on glancing at those license plates as they came in front of him. So think about that, and then we'll talk about the specifics. But remember, it can be applied to any time, any situation that we may find ourselves. Okay, with why practice mindfulness? Well, something old is new again. There's nothing new here. The practices are centuries old. And what are some ways that people have already practiced mindfulness and meditation? Mindfulness got its start, and the reason why it's become part of our now daily reminders, and why my insurance company is sending out information about meditation, even though more it's about mindfulness, got started in the United States. Not got started, but really picked up some momentum. John Kabat-Zinn was a psychologist at a large New England hospital that also was attached to a university. So they had a lot of studies. And he started working with patients who had cancer and it was terminal. And the physicians basically said, "There's not anything more I can do for this patient." So they would send these patients to John Kabat-Zinn, who started them on the road of learning mindfulness. And the first exercise he did with this group, and they would all be together starting at one time. And remember, this was a study, so there was data being tracked. The first day, he would give everybody a raisin. And he would ask people to put that raisin in their mouth. What's the texture? Do you smell anything? What's the flavor? To slowly chew that raisin. And what that did is demonstrate the focus. Where do you put your focus? And instead of out there what ifing and if onlys, the focus was on that raisin. That was the first step. What John Kabat-Zinn's research showed is that those people who had terminal cancer that went through his program, they didn't all necessarily survive, but they had a life that was much calmer, was more relaxed, and they could find what joy they could in their life. So the idea of here we have an increasingly stressful world. I don't think anybody that's listening would disagree with that. What with COVID, social unrest, a lot of medical complexity, especially as a caregiver, you know how complex just the medical issues are, whether it's in a doctor's office or a hospital, and you may have a great physician and staff, but it's still very complicated with insurance and all the complexity. And then, of course, caregiving, great big letters, caregiving, a source of really a lot of your stress. And that's why you're joining us today. Practices that are easily said and done. We know that we need to eat better. We know we need to exercise. But I want to assure you, even if you do all of those things, it does not necessarily solve all problems. I worked with a client. She was a young girl. She was dealing with a lot of anxiety about afraid she'd never find anybody. And she was wanting a relationship. And she worked out all the time. And she couldn't understand why she didn't feel better. And she'd focused on her nutrition. And so, what mindfulness is just another part of an overall wellness plan of eating well and getting exercise, but then doing these internal practices that will enhance our health and well being. There's a growing body of research that this works. Pure and simple, it works. Uh, Caregivers need self care and ways to manage stress. Duh, no kidding. All right. So let's go to the next. Um, it can become a cornerstone of self care. Again, there's a lot of research. The basic tools, bullet number two, the basic tools include deep breathing. I want you to start in your daily lives to kind of notice how many times on television or anywhere that somebody will say, take a breath, take a breath, take a breath. And you may have been told that. What happens with humans is when they're under stress, they tend to breathe from the top of their lungs. And they go into what's called a fight or flight. It's just a natural human reaction to situations that are highly stressful. And what deep breathing does is it forces oxygen into the cells, into the lungs, and then into the cells. And it starts providing a calmness so that, and if you ever have done any deep breathing, you can you can tell us about how things change, they shift. So mindfulness starts with deep breathing. There are other techniques. Next bullet, always make sure that you're seeing a physician for regular medical care. Some things are blamed on stress that may have a medical cause. One of the very common things that I'm thinking of right now is women and men, especially older, have a tendency to develop UTIs. And the behaviors of UTIs very often um, will mimic Alzheimer's and dementia, and will make you, if you have a UTI, to feel lousy all the time. So it's important to have that medical care. Mindfulness does not take the place of medical care, but it does help support support medical treatment. And mindfulness has been shown also to help with individual and family counseling. Well, what does that have to do with a caregiver? Most caregivers are dealing with a family, and there are family meetings and family conferences and just communication. And even if no one else in the family is practicing, you are coming into situations with a different set of tools. Okay, let's try it. I ask you to write down, to do a check and write down what you were feeling, what you were experiencing, and to try to rate it if you could. One being very relaxed, and five being and not so much. So, if you'd like to share with us what you evaluated yourself at the beginning, was it, and that's okay if you don't want to, that's all right. Was it four, five, three, or were you having a good day and it was a one? If you want to write that in the chat, and then what I'd ask you to do is wherever you are, to sit quietly in your chair, get very comfortable if you need to move to a chair that's more comfortable. Or sometimes we don't have that option. We may be at a hospital and the chairs can be uncomfortable, but just sit. And what I'd like to ask you to do is to take 3 deep breaths. And when I say a deep breath, breathe in as much as you can, at least to 5, 8 if you can, but don't strain. And fill your lungs, ideally from the bottom all the way to the top. And then exhale. Inhale, exhale. What we know is that this feeds the bloodstream with oxygen, and it provides very much a sense of calm and a sense of peace for that moment, just for that moment. Continue your deep breathing or go back to your normal breath and pick something in the room or the office where you are, doesn't matter what it is, to focus on. It can be anything. Look at that object and really pay attention to what it looks like. If you had to describe it, what does it look like? Its color, its shape, its purpose, if it has one, the details of what you are seeing, details of what you are seeing. Then, as you sit and you're concentrating on whatever you chose, listen. What do you hear? Is it so quiet where you are right now that you hear your own heartbeat or your own breath? Or can you hear background noise as I do right now? Continue to breathe and have an awareness that you're seeking calm, you're seeking peace. And then breathe in. What do you smell? Hopefully, what you smell is something pleasant, or maybe it's neutral. You don't smell much of anything. But focus on once you can breathe in. For most of you, depending on where you are, you're either waiting for lunch or you've had lunch. And think about that last meal you had, whether it was good or bad, and choose one item that was on that tray or that you chose to eat in your home. Choose one item. Imagine it. Imagine what it was, what it looked like. Was there a smell to it? A pleasant smell, or something that is not so pleasant, but it tastes good, like my tuna salad. Um, but really focus on feel and imagine what it tastes like. Or if you've got a soda where you are or a glass of water, take a sip of that. What does it taste like? Does it have any taste at all? Is it cold? Is it warm? So, what we've done is that we've gone through the senses. The one sense we've not done yet is feel where you're sitting in that chair, where your arms, are you sitting back in the chair or on the edge or the sofa or the floor or wherever you've chosen to sit? So if you put all of this together, what you're seeing, what you're hearing, what you're smelling, what you're feeling with your sense, with your even with your fingers, the texture of that chair that you're in. This is the core of mindfulness. It is in the moment and it's about reality. It's not what ifs, it's not what only, if only. It is about what you are experiencing right now. That's the core of mindfulness, living in the moment. And I want to ask you all, are you any calmer? If you go back to your list and you had rated from 1 to 5, one number, has that number shifted up or down? Hopefully, it shifted down to where you're a little bit calmer, maybe a lot calmer. I can tell you very frequently when I've done this in a big room of people, the room changes. It's it's odd in a good way, but it's almost like I would say the energy. Things slow down. And when I say open your eyes or come back to awareness, like I'm going to ask you, come back to awareness of what we're doing right now. There's just a difference. Now, it's this moment, and how long would it last? That depends on how much we are developing these techniques to where they become more of a habit and more natural. I want to go back to the what ifs and the if onlys. I come from world class worry warts, believe me. And I caught myself early in my life following along with that. And I had watched the female, and it was mostly the females, I had watched them worry their life away, stressed, and a lot of the things they worried about never happened that way. And think about some of the things you have worried and fretted about in the past. Very often, for many caregivers, they're good at planning and organizing. And taken to extremes, that planning for the future becomes, what if this doesn't work? What if that doesn't work? And I've seen it in my own lives. I've seen it in other caregivers that they are worrying and fretting about things that they have no control of right now. Planning is one thing. Planning is, I know what's going to happen according to a schedule, or I have a friend that's in the hospital and I'm doing her laundry and I'll be going up to visit her. She has family coming in from out of town. There's a plan in place. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about this. What happens if she feels like the clothes weren't done right, or what happens if the family's delayed? What happens, or the if only I had encouraged him to go to, if only I had made him go to the doctor before. Well, for one thing, none of us can make anybody do anything that they don't want to do. It may feel like we have, but ultimately 99% of the time, the person has to choose whatever they do. So, given that and this practice that we just did, how many of you are able to say that that helped somewhat? I see someone who is now at a 3, and hopefully that went down from wherever she started. But did that make a difference? And just like anything in life, it takes practice. There's a reason that in physical fitness, many people have a trainer. And most people know how to use the equipment or they know what they need to do, but they need someone to coach them through it and to encourage it until it becomes more of a habit. And that's what this is about. Make it more of a habit. I'm going to provide you with some links to YouTube where there are good examples of mindfulness being used. And mindfulness can include the guided imagery. One of the best that I've seen, and I've experienced it more and more, or many times over, is the John Cabot Zen, and that's uh, Zinn. It's a hyphenated on YouTube, and it's a mountain meditation. Very powerful. If we have time, I might guide you through that, but do some searches and you'll find a lot of information. I remember that a couple of years ago, I did some searches and there were a phenomenal list of these type of uh, exercises. They didn't call it mindfulness. Many of them were for sleep, but they were coming out of Australia. And there's a couple of them that are done by two guys who are brothers, and they have the Australian accent. So I'm not really sure what's with the Australian connection, but there are many things that are online to make use of. So go to YouTube and try that. All right. Hopefully um, that helped you a little bit. Let me go back to my comment about I come from world class warriors. um, I made a mindful decision that I was going into recovery from worry, meaning that a mindful, conscious decision that when I found myself going down that trail, and I still lapse sometimes, of the what ifing or the if only, I stop, and it doesn't take long now. Believe me, practice does help. I'll stop and I will take a few deep breaths and then I'll redirect my attention to something that's real because a lot of what we have going on in our heads and in our minds, it isn't real. And if you can, one of the tests of this is what control do you have over that right now? What control do you have over that? If you have some control, then do something. But if you don't have that control, it's time to redirect your attention and do something that you do have control over. All right, let's keep moving along. All right, I've provided you 20 specific practical stress management tips. This is all self care. Number one, breathe. I just spent a lot of time talking about that. Number two, manage stress before it becomes a crisis. Can you identify with that? Frequently that happens with people. I can handle it. I'm going to keep pushing. I know I can do this. I'm just going to spend a little bit more time with it. And then that one day becomes another day and we're still not taking a break. And often caregivers will find themselves getting sick with things like whether it's a cold or they have headaches. Um, But what has happened is their body has just said enough already. So think about recognizing the stress. What I can tell you is that a mindfulness practice raises your awareness of the price of stress on your body and on your thinking and on everything. And if you make it more of a practice and you start listening to what your internal self is telling you when you're trying to relax, that voice is probably saying, I can do things differently. Reframe how you see situations. How many times have you thought that here we go again and it always has the same outcome? I would invite you to think in terms of, can you mentally take a couple of steps either direction and look at that situation with a different frame, with a different perspective. Do you see it differently? Does this provide you some ways that you can have control or you can do something different? Reframe it. Ask for help. Caregivers really struggle with that because they're used to doing it, whatever it was. And frequently, caregivers have always been the one in the family that family turns to and that people turn to. And asking for help doesn't come naturally for many people. But I do know some caregivers that have learned another practice of asking for help and be specific about what you need. Frequently, when someone perhaps gets home from the doctor, you're or from a hospital, and you're the caregiver, and there are certain things that are going to have to take place, and people will say, "Well, just let me know what you need." And we're sitting there thinking, can't they see what I need? Well, maybe they can't, or they don't know how to say it. So be specific about what you need. Number five, take care of your physical and mental health. Have some fun. Respond, don't react. A lot of our lives is reacting to what's going on instead of the response is what has just happened? What caused it to happen? And what can I do about it? Instead of just pushing back or reacting. Practice letting go of what you cannot control. That's an echo of what I said earlier. And what I said earlier, what can I do right now about this situation? Practice resilience. I often think of a rubber band. If you stretch a rubber band, what will it do? It will, when you let it go, hopefully not against yourself to where you hurt yourself or somebody else. But when you let it go, it's going to go back to its natural state. And do you know what happens to a rubber band who loses its resilience? It sits in the back of a drawer, it becomes brittle and it breaks. Number 12, recognize your history and what your triggers are. And I love this quote. This is a management training quote. If you always do what you've always done, you're always going to get what you always got. You're always going to get the same result. So that idea of reframing can sometimes keep going with that idea and see what can I do about this that's different that I have done not done before. Practice activities, or I'm sorry, prioritize activities according to how important they are and the time you have. Staying busy does not necessarily mean you're being productive. Everybody has had that sense that at the end of the day, what did I get done? And here's a list over here that I've got a lot of priorities. Well, step back, do some breathing, do some mindfulness. And again, I'm going to show you some places to get some of that practice, and look at it a different way, prioritize differently, recognize the harmful effects of perfectionism. When we're trying to do something for someone else and we can't control a situation, a doctor's schedule, the hospital, whatever, take steps to be more flexible. Again, what can I do about this? Be willing to accept that sometimes enough is okay. It doesn't have to be finished or perfect. Enough is okay. High cost of worry and a low rate of return. Decide and just do it. Procrastination adds stress. I think everybody would agree with that. Surround yourself with winners. Maintain winning relationships. Try to avoid negative and critical people. They may be in your family, even, but perhaps you can redirect them by getting a conversation that goes in a direction other than what is causing stress for you. I love this quote. There's a reason we have two ears and one mouth. We need to listen more, listen to maybe the person we care for, listen to the people around us. Everyone that's probably listening at one time or another has been with a friend or with a neighbor, and all of a sudden they realize that they have done nothing but tell the same story over and over and over. It's important to get your caregiving experience out. It's important. But saying it over and over just gives it more fuel and more energy. Write it down in a journal, talk it through, with someone and then be willing to move on to something else. Educate yourself about caregiving. That's what you're doing today. Join a support group or at least find one other person you can talk to honestly. Take one day at a time and value it if it was your last. Okay, everybody has to find what works for them. And I want to pose a few questions, and you're going to have these materials, so you might want to come back to this. Am I sure about what matters most? What am I learning? I think everyone who's a caregiver recognizes that caregiving is a continual learning process, and learning means having more experience. What am I doing to take care of myself? What can I delegate or ask help with? What can I say no to? Another tough one for many caregivers. I would encourage you to go back and look at this later. But the idea of this is maintaining balance. Like I said before, I had a client that she exercised all the time, but thinking that's what would solve it, but it didn't. She had to find some balance in her life. This first one, and then we're going to go on to some questions and discussion. What would you tell someone else in your shoes? In other words, if you were talking to someone you respect and you like, and they were telling you your story, what would you tell them? And for most of you, what you would say is, yes, but what are you doing for yourself? How can you take better care of yourself? Take care of yourself, and then offer them some ideas like, hey, let's stop right now and just catch your breath. What are you willing to do differently? I've included 20 quotes. We're not going to read them, but they're there for you to go through. But some of them are really, really profound. What would water do? It never holds or clings. It flows, it moves, it adapts, never resisting, simply going with where it is flowing, always finding the way. I particularly love that one about caregiving. All right. You can see there's a bunch of them. I had to eventually just stop. All right. Specific tools. These are a list of the mindfulness apps the last time I looked. Calm is a popular one. Most of them do have a fee. However, it's not necessarily an expensive one, but if that is an issue for you, certainly understand that. One thing I like about Calm is Calm does bedtime stories. I'm more familiar with it. Bedtime stories for adults. And one of them, for example, is, and very often it's a celebrity that's reading or telling a story. And one of them is taking a train across the Alps and just describing it. UCLA has mindfulness program that's free to people who want to dial into it. Then you'll have all this information. These are on our website, and our website is Family Caregivers Online. Don't pay any attention to that, to the zandas.net. That's no longer an active, since I retired the practice, that's not active. But you can put any of those into a browser. But go to familycaregiversonline.net, familycaregiversonline.net. Or you can look on the first slide, and my name is on it. And if you type in on most browsers my name and mindfulness, some of this will come up. Recordings, and that's not mine. It's UCLA recordings about their research center, and it's some examples. We also have on our website, there are several people who have recorded mindfulness practices and examples. So again, just dig down and see what you can get, or just do your own search of mindfulness practice. This is from the website. We have many, many blogs, and on the blogs are a lot of search tools that you just put in whatever that you're looking for. Here's John Kabat-Zinn that I mentioned. He is the founder of mindfulness-based stress reduction. His research was so profound about people going in and learning these techniques that he became pretty famous, and his studies went on for many years. Mindfulness exercises, Mayo Clinic. Now, for those of you, even if you get a PDF of this or a just the PowerPoint slides, you can click through these, or you can send me an email and I'll be glad to send you a link. And that email is caregiver@att.net. Caregiver@att.net. TED Talks have a lot of really good instructional talks about mindfulness. One of my favorite is a guy that's talking about juggling, mindfulness and how it relates to juggling. That's worth a look. Try to find that one, huh? And for those of you that like data, I've included some research where you can find some of the data that's being done. Resources for caregivers. Hopefully, you've been given some of this throughout your journey. 211 throughout Texas and throughout the US. It's a Health and Human Services line. In Texas, that's the number to find your local area agency on aging. The area agency on aging across the United States are the official local community source for older adult information and services and for caregivers. Elder Care Locator helps find information throughout the United States. And then there's our website that I mentioned before, familycaregiversonline.net, where you can find online education, resources, links, frequently asked questions, or a lot of information. This is all free to you. And I like to tell people, this is your tax dollars at work. This is your federal and other tax dollars at work. Benefits Checkup is an online way to go in and find resources across the US. You can find a link on our site. I just particularly like this. Some people, no matter how old they are, never lose their beauty. They merely move it from their faces into their hearts. Hopefully, you are caring for someone that you can still see their value and the character. And even if you have a difficult relationship, that you find in them something that you can appreciate, love, like, whatever. All right, let's open it up. Those of us, most of you are still with us. Questions or comments, please. Questions. Go ahead. Did I hear somebody trying to ask a question? I'm going to take this off of screen share. And again, everybody is going to get a copy of this PowerPoint presentation. And if there's anything else that I think would be helpful. Okay, let me rephrase what I asked you. What one thing that I said today, or you read on the slide, that was the most meaningful or helpful for you? What one thing kind of stuck with you? What one thing? Elizabeth says, breathe. Breathing. The best way to start. How about the rest of you? What one thing? Or maybe you're just overwhelmed with information, or you can't wait to start doing some research. And again, I'll mention the mountain meditation. It's a pretty powerful one. Check out some of those apps that you can get on your phone, because many of them are very helpful. Like I said, Calm is my choice, and I choose to pay for it, but I don't use as much as I'm paying for. What one thing or what was the best part of your experience today? Mindfulness can be applied at any time, no matter day or night. Absolutely. I want to pose this question. How many of you changed your how relaxed you were, even one point, one number at the end from where you started? How many of you became more relaxed? Linda likes the resources. And is there any resource any of you would like to recommend? We have people from all of the US, but the area agencies on aging are throughout the US. Elder care is a 1-800 number. The federal government, through Health and Human Services, provides a lot of the funding, most of the funding, actually. Okay, my last question to all of you, since we have a pause here, is what are you going to do different? What one thing are you going to try to do different? One thing, just a short message. What one thing are you that stuck with you that you're going to try to do differently? Okay. Iman says, incorporate some mindfulness and breathing into my daily routine. Excellent. What one thing are you going to do differently? Anybody else out there have a problem with the what ifing, and maybe you don't call it worry? My cousin says she doesn't worry, but she's what ifing all day. Bless her heart. She's a great planner, and that's under stress. Her planning becomes um, fretting and worrying about what's going to happen in the future. What if this happens? Anybody else? Okay. Responding, not reacting. That one was very powerful for me too. And when I think of that, reacting in simple terms is if somebody pushes you, your natural reaction is to push them back. I mean, that's just as a protection, that fight or flight. But responding is what's going on that you want to, what just happened that you're pushing me? What's going on that's making you want to push me? Well, maybe we need to talk about that. Okay, we're coming up on an hour. Any last thoughts before we sign off? I want to pose to you the question. Oh, Gladys has said, take care of myself because our family member with any kind of dementia will stay here. But if we don't care for us, we can't give a good time to them and we will all be sick. No kidding. And you do know the statistics are sometimes the caregiver becomes more ill than the person they take care of. So, what I was going to say a while ago is make a commitment that to yourself that at the close of this or at the close of the day or as soon as you can get around to it, make a list of maybe the top 3 things that you want to start doing differently that you've learned here today. Refer back to that list of practical stress management tips. Go to some of those links and practice some of the mindfulness recordings. And what's so great about that, all you have to do is listen and do what they suggest. Um, look through some of the links that's on there. If part of what you wrote down is resources, remember resources, some of them are based on income, many of them are not. Um, but especially assessments, very often the area agency is on age and can help you with that. So, everyone, take one deep, okay, something else I learned today, that when I need help, I have to be specific about what I need. That's a good one. All right. Before we end, everybody join me in a deep breath and maybe add a couple of those. And thank you for joining us. Truly take care of yourself. And next month, we will have another teleconnection. And if you look at the teleconnection schedule, there's always something good going on. Take care. Thank you very much for joining me. Take care.